This is the time-lapse of a rough animation I did, and this video will be talking mostly about what I've learned about animation as someone doing it for pretty much the first time. I apologize if there's any information that seems wrong, as this is solely based on my research and personal thoughts throughout this project. When I first started the animation, I went with rough sketches of each scene before I went in and added detail. This was to make sure the character and object placement looked okay before I went in and spent more time on the frame. These rough sketches were based off of my storyboards, which are also extremely simple and only showed the bare idea of what I wanted for each scene. In my opinion, one of the most important things I learned about during this project were the use of keyframes and the frames that go in between them, which are called transitional frames. The keyframes show the beginning and end of the actions taken by the characters, and the transitional frames fill in that space to show the actual movement. The more frames there are, the smoother the motion will look once the animation is played. The same can be said for frames per second. The higher the frames per second you use, the smoother everything will look, as long as there are enough frames to keep up with the increased overall speed of the animation. Another thing I found really helpful to show movement in transitional frames were smears and action lines. They basically show that the character is moving so fast that the human eye would naturally see it as a blur. Action lines also help to emphasize the movement, direction, or generally draw focus. For these smears here, I just stretched the features in the transitional frames, which gave a weird illusion of blurred motion, which was maybe not as fast as I had wanted it, so next time I'll try experimenting with more action lines and different ways to draw smears. Consistency was also something that I found to be really important to the natural flow of the animation. I had kind of a hard time getting the motions and movements to look good and consistent, but I was able to make good use of the onion skin feature to place characters and parts of the background in the right spots. A really simple way that I would recommend to help with this is going back and constantly playing through the frames that you've already drawn out. This way it's easier to observe for yourself and judge what does or doesn't need to be tweaked. You can also scroll through the frames at your own pace to look at them, or adjust the frames per second as you work on the animation. Just keep in mind that the slower the frames per second, the choppier the motions will end up being. For drawing out the motions, it is also good to use references. Looking up what kind of movement looks like in real life is a good way to make it look natural. I would also try and avoid using duplicate frames too often, since it makes the character look extremely stiff. People tend to always be making the smallest motions and they are hardly ever completely still, so incorporating small things like slight changes in facial expression or hair movement looks really good. If you want to make your character pause or stop, I'd recommend redrawing them with slight changes every frame so they look more lifelike. One last thing, due to a lack of time in my drawing the character shoulders up for most of the animation, I also didn't put a lot of detail in the clothing or folds. If I had, it would have looked a lot better, but added to the amount of work that would have needed to go into the different movements, since the folds of the clothes need to correspond to the different movements of the characters. Thank you for watching. I hope that you learned something from this video. Here's the animation. Please keep in mind that this was purely educational and me testing out animation, so it will not be anywhere near a professional level.